They say every generation of men faces its own quiet rebellion. For this one, it's not war or politics or revolution. It's withdrawal. Successful men with thriving careers, financial independence, emotional stability, and discipline are walking away from dating. Not because they've failed with women, but because they've succeeded without them. And that's what makes this phenomenon so fascinating. These aren't bitter men. They're not anti-love. They're men who've looked at modern dating, the emotional costs, the contradictions, the shifting expectations, and decided, this isn't worth my peace anymore. They've run the math, they've studied the psychology, and they've realized something deeply unsettling. The game has changed, but the risks haven't. See, in the past, a man's success was a bridge toward connection. Today, it's often a liability, something that draws attention, expectation, or entitlement. And when the emotional investment, time, and energy no longer guarantee even basic reciprocity, many men are asking themselves the question society doesn't want them to ask. Why am I doing this? This isn't about cynicism, it's about clarity. It's about men recognizing that their peace, their focus, and their autonomy are assets, and modern relationships often feel like threats to those assets. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. The modern dating market operates on emotional asymmetry. Men are expected to be strong but sensitive, confident but humble, protective but never controlling, ambitious but not too busy. It's a paradox, one that leaves even the most grounded men feeling like they're failing invisible tests they never agreed to take. So, instead of playing by those rules, they're stepping away, not out of defeat, but out of discipline. Not because they've given up on women, but because they've finally chosen themselves. And that choice to walk alone rather than chase chaos isn't isolation, it's sovereignty. It's a declaration that peace, purpose, and freedom matter more than validation, approval, or fleeting affection. Over the next few minutes, we'll explore what's driving this silent exodus, the deep psychological forces behind why so many men, at their peak, are choosing solitude over romance. Because understanding this shift isn't just about men and women, it's about something much larger, the redefining of what it truly means to live, to connect, and to be free. Let's begin. Section 1. The new calculus of success. Something subtle shifted over the last 2 decades. So subtle, most people only notice it when they step back and scan their life in full. The metrics of success changed, the rewards of adulthood altered, and men who chased that success discovered something unexpected. What used to be a ladder into partnership has become for many a moat. For centuries, a man's value was measured in provision and protection, work, sacrifice, and responsibility, translated fairly directly into social standing, family, and partnership. A man who could provide was welcomed into a home. His labor and reliability formed the backbone of a stable domestic life. That old bargain contained rough justice but clear expectations. You work, you build, you belong. Today, success looks different. It is less about survival and more about craft, meaning, and personal sovereignty. He's not just a provider, he's a creator of life design. He built a career he loves, he paid off debts, he cultivated hobbies that feed his soul. He has a circle of friends that energizes, not drains. He's learned to protect his mental bandwidth, to structure his days so work, rest, and meaning exist in balance. That autonomy is a form of wealth in itself, and with that autonomy comes an escalation in standards, not arrogance but discernment. When your life is already good, inviting someone into it is no small decision. It's not simply finding a partner. It's deciding who is allowed to affect your mornings, your creative focus, your weekends, your finances, your mental peace. The cost of admission becomes higher because your baseline is already comfortable, purposeful, and intentionally curated. But the modern dating ecosystem often misunderstands or disregards that logic. It still operates on outdated scripts, courtship defined by sacrifice and compromise, roles shaped by expectation rather than negotiation, and a marketplace that prizes display over durable fit. The apps encourage speed, the culture incentivizes performance, and social media turns intimacy into a highlight reel. For a man who has learned to measure life by depth, not spectacle, these dynamics feel hollow, even dangerous. So the calculus changes. He weighs not just attraction, but disruption. He measures time as currency, and vulnerability as a liability in a world that often weaponizes openness. He compares the value of companionship against the real and intangible losses: less sleep, less creative output, less freedom to travel, more emotional labor spent calming anxieties that may not even be his to bear. This isn't an indictment of modern love, it's a rational risk assessment. He's not refusing connection, he's refusing imbalance. He's deciding that a relationship must demonstrably add to his peaceful architecture, rather than demand he tear a wall down to make room. And when the marketplace offers more friction than harmony, the rational choice for many of these men is to step back rather than step in. That decision reframes everything. Walking away stops being a failure and becomes a strategic move, an act of preservation, discipline, and self-respect. When you build a life worth protecting, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is close the gate rather than keep inviting strangers through it. Section 2. The high cost of admission. Let's talk about the real economics of modern dating, not in theory but in practice. Because when successful men say they're walking away, they're not making an emotional statement. They're making a financial, temporal, and psychological calculation. They've simply looked at the numbers, and the math doesn't make sense anymore. Start with the financial cost. Dating today isn't just dinners and flowers, it's an unspoken economy of expectation. The man is still expected to initiate, to plan, to pay, to impress. He's told that generosity is attractive, but rarely that it's also a test. Studies show men spend an average of $1,500 a year on dating, but that's only the surface layer. The opportunity cost, the money that could have gone toward investments, experiences, or personal development, is often several times higher. For men who've worked years to build financial discipline, that kind of expenditure starts to look irrational when the emotional return on investment is uncertain at best. Then comes the time cost, the currency more valuable than money. The average man on dating apps spends over an hour a day swiping, messaging, and managing conversations that rarely go anywhere. That's 22 full days a year, nearly a month of life spent chasing possibility rather than living purpose. For a man whose schedule is calibrated around focus, fitness, business, or personal mastery, that's not romance. That's distraction disguised as effort. Next, the emotional cost, the one few are willing to quantify. Modern dating requires constant emotional performance, being available, understanding, communicative, self-aware. It demands openness, but punishes vulnerability. A man learns to calibrate every message, every tone, every emotional expression to fit invisible expectations. He's encouraged to show emotion, but only the right kind. He's told to be honest, but only if that honesty doesn't make her uncomfortable. Over time, this becomes exhausting, a performance that drains him while providing no safe space to actually be him. And finally, there's the risk cost, the shadow that follows every modern relationship. Divorce rates hovering near 50%, legal systems that can financially devastate a man overnight, custody biases that reduce fatherhood to weekends and court schedules. For men who've built something substantial, businesses, assets, reputations, the potential downside isn't abstract, it's existential. So when he looks at the whole picture, the dinners, the swipes, the energy, the risk, he doesn't feel bitter, he feels pragmatic. Because at some point a man realizes that every yes costs him something. Every date, every commitment, every emotional opening requires a withdrawal from the vault of his focus and peace. And when the emotional return fails to justify the investment, when dating feels less like connection and more like risk exposure, he makes a decision that society still finds uncomfortable. He stops playing. Not because he's afraid to lose, but because he's learned there's no prize worth the price of his peace. Section 3. The sovereignty of self. At some point in his journey, every successful man comes to understand a profound truth. Freedom isn't just external, it's psychological. It's not only about money, status, or power. It's about sovereignty, the right to live life on your own terms, unbent by external pressure or emotional manipulation. And in a world where every demand seems to chip away at that sovereignty, it becomes sacred. Modern psychology calls it self-determination theory, the idea that human beings need three things to thrive: autonomy, competence, and connection. But for men who've built their own empires, whether that empire is a business, a body, or a peaceful life, autonomy becomes the foundation of everything else. Without it, competence and connection collapse. These men have spent years, even decades, constructing a life where their decisions are theirs. They've sacrificed sleep, comfort, relationships, and sometimes their own health to build something no one else could give them. Control. Not control over others, but over themselves. Now imagine what happens when a relationship starts to demand that control back. Suddenly, his time isn't entirely his. His plans need to be explained. His routines, his focus, his solitude, all become negotiable. Not in dramatic ways at first, but in subtle, consistent ones. Why didn't you text me? Why do you need so much alone time? Why are you always working? And little by little, his sovereignty begins to erode. He's told that compromise is the price of love. But compromise, for him, often feels like surrender. Because what he's giving up isn't stubbornness, it's self-respect. It's the boundaries that protect his peace. He's expected to share everything, his time, his emotional energy, even his silence in the name of closeness. But the deeper irony is this. The very qualities that made him desirable, his focus, his independence, his composure, are the ones relationships often ask him to soften, so he ends up trapped in a paradox. If he guards his independence, he's cold. If he gives too much, he loses himself. And after enough cycles of this, he stops fighting the pattern and starts protecting his perimeter. He learns that peace is not loneliness, that solitude is not punishment, that protecting your boundaries is not selfish, it's sane. He realizes that his autonomy is not negotiable, because every time he's traded it away, he's paid with a currency more precious than money. His clarity, his focus, his soul stillness, and so he chooses differently. He stops apologizing for his solitude. He stops explaining his peace. He stops seeking permission to exist as he is, because in the end, the man who builds his own kingdom learns something most people never will. Freedom isn't found in being loved. It's found in not needing to be rescued. Section 4. The weaponization of vulnerability. Modern culture tells men to be vulnerable, to open up, share their emotions, communicate more. On the surface, it sounds healthy, progressive, healing, but for many men, that advice has become a trap, because while vulnerability is praised in theory, it's punished in practice. When a man finally opens up, he expects understanding. Instead, what he often receives is discomfort or disappointment. The woman who once saw him as strong begins to see him as uncertain. The attraction dulls, the dynamic shifts. His honesty, the very thing he was told would deepen intimacy, now feels like a liability, and sometimes it gets worse. That same vulnerability becomes a weapon. Words he shared in trust are thrown back during arguments. His fears are mocked. His confessions are used as leverage. Slowly he learns that openness carries a cost, one too high to keep paying, so he adapts. He becomes emotionally fluent but personally guarded. He learns to say the right words to simulate emotional awareness without exposing the softest parts of himself. It's performance, not presence, and while the world applauds his sensitivity, inside he's shut down. Over time, this cycle creates an emotional paradox. He's told women want authenticity, yet punished for showing it. He's told to share, yet safer when silent. The result? Emotional isolation inside relationships that were supposed to bring connection. So when he stops opening up, it's not because he's cold or broken. It's because he's learned the truth in the wrong hands. Honesty is ammunition. Vulnerability isn't always intimacy. Sometimes it's exposure. And for the man who's been burned by his own openness, silence no longer feels like distance. It feels like self-defense. Section 5. The Scarcity Illusion. High standards versus true connection. One of the most misunderstood criticisms aimed at successful men is that they have unrealistic standards. Society calls them too picky, too demanding, or afraid to settle. But let's look deeper, because what's often called unrealistic is simply the result of hard-earned clarity. The modern dating world operates on a strange illusion, an illusion of abundance. With dating apps, social media, and infinite access, it feels like there are endless options. Swipe left, swipe right, someone new is always waiting. But that illusion of choice creates a hidden paradox. The more options you see, the more you focus on what's missing. You stop valuing what's real. For the successful man, this illusion becomes exhausting. He meets women who look ideal on paper, attractive, ambitious, socially polished, yet something's missing. The connection feels transactional. The emotional rhythm isn't there. The more he dates, the more he realizes that chemistry without depth is just performance. So he raises his standards not for perfection, but for authenticity. He's no longer searching for someone impressive. He's searching for someone aligned. A partner who shares his values, emotional maturity and peace. Someone who enhances his world rather than competes with it. But as his clarity sharpens, the dating pool shrinks. The deeper his requirements, the rarer genuine connection becomes. Each shallow encounter reinforces what he already suspects, that real partnership is rare. And yet, instead of lowering the bar, he holds the line. Because his standards aren't a symptom of arrogance, they're an expression of self-respect. He's not rejecting women, he's rejecting misalignment. He's not looking for a trophy, he's looking for truth. And if that truth means walking alone for a while longer, so be it. Because a man who's built a fulfilling life doesn't fear solitude, he fears losing himself in the wrong connection. For him, high standards aren't a barrier to love, they're the only path to the kind that lasts. Section 6. The Unspoken Terror, Legal and Financial Minefields. Behind the calm confidence of many successful men lies a quiet anxiety few ever acknowledge, the fear of what love could cost them, not emotionally, but legally, financially, tangibly. Because in today's world, relationships don't just carry emotional risks, they come with the possibility of life-altering consequences. For the man who's worked years, maybe decades, to build stability, every romantic commitment carries invisible fine print. He's seen the stories, the divorces that turn into financial wars, the custody battles that strip fathers of their children, the settlements that erase years of savings overnight. It's not cynicism, it's pattern recognition. He knows that the modern legal system, while built on ideals of fairness, often plays out unevenly in practice. Assets can vanish, businesses can be divided, his future can be dictated by a courtroom, and for a man who's fought his entire life for control over his destiny, that's a nightmare. So he becomes cautious, not unloving but alert. He dates differently, he hesitates before commitment. He protects what he's built. He draws financial boundaries that others interpret as emotional distance. But what he's really doing is protecting the years of work that gave him the freedom to love in the first place. The tragedy is that this caution can be mistaken for detachment. He wants connection, but not at the cost of collapse. He wants partnership, but not dependency. He's not afraid of giving. He's afraid of being legally bound to someone who might one day weaponize that trust. It's not a lack of romance, it's survival instinct. And while the world may label him paranoid or guarded, he understands something most people ignore. Trust isn't built on promises, it's built on predictability. It's built on actions that prove alignment, not words that fade when things get hard. Until he finds that kind of partnership, one grounded in mutual respect and shared values, he'll stay cautious. Because for a man who's earned everything he has, the greatest risk isn't being alone, it's choosing wrong and paying for it forever. Section 7. The Peaceful Kingdom. The Allure of Solitude. At first, solitude feels unfamiliar, even unsettling. The silence can be heavy, the evenings long, but over time, something begins to shift. The quiet stops feeling like absence and starts to feel like ownership. For the successful man who stepped away from the chaos of modern dating, solitude becomes not a void, but a kingdom. In this kingdom, there's peace. He wakes up without tension. He moves through his day without needing to explain his choices. His time is his own again, no texts demanding attention, no emotional turbulence breaking his focus. For the first time in years, his life feels like his. Here, he rediscovers clarity. He learns to enjoy stillness. He reconnects with forgotten passions. The books he never finished, the ideas he once shelved, the ambitions that got buried under compromise. He invests in his body, his work, his spirit. He builds a life that feels whole, not waiting for permission or validation to make it meaningful. And the irony? The more complete he becomes in solitude, the more attractive he grows. There's something magnetic about a man who is content alone because his peace can't be bargained with. His presence feels grounded, not grasping. He doesn't need anyone to complete him, which makes any connection he chooses infinitely more authentic. Still, solitude has its paradox. The longer he lives in peace, the harder it is to re-enter chaos. The thought of surrendering that hard-won quiet for another uncertain relationship feels risky, so he stays still, not bitter, just discerning. He's learned that solitude, when chosen, isn't loneliness, it's mastery. Because the man who can stand comfortably in his own silence is the one who no longer fears being unseen. And when or if he chooses to love again, it won't be to fill an emptiness. It'll be to share a kingdom. Section 8. The Shifting Sands. The unclear rules and conflicting expectations. If there's one word that defines modern dating, it's confusion. The rules change faster than anyone can keep up. The expectations are blurry, the roles contradictory, and the standards often double. For many men, it's not that they've lost interest in love, it's that they can no longer decode the playbook. In past generations, relationships followed clearer rhythms. There was courtship, structure, shared understanding. You knew the expectations, even if they were imperfect. Today, everything is fluid. Boundaries, definitions, intentions. Casual means one thing to him and something entirely different to her. Commitment is discussed endlessly, but practiced rarely, and in this fog of mixed signals, good intentions constantly collide with unmet expectations. He's told to be confident but not aggressive, assertive but never controlling, ambitious but still available, vulnerable but never weak. It's an impossible balancing act, and the rules shift mid-game. Every interaction feels like a social test. One misstep and he's labelled toxic, insecure, emotionally unavailable, or worse. The psychological toll is real. Even the most emotionally intelligent man grows weary of guessing what version of himself he's allowed to be. This is the heart of modern dating fatigue. Uncertainty, the lack of consistent truth, the erosion of trust, not between individuals, but in the very system that's supposed to bring them together. So he adapts. He stops chasing validation and starts seeking clarity. Instead of trying to read invisible cues, he asks direct questions. Instead of performing what he thinks someone wants, he simply states who he is, and that honesty, though refreshing, often drives people away, because most aren't ready for that kind of simplicity. So he stands alone again, not defeated, but awake. He's learned that peace isn't found in trying to decode others, it's found in defining himself. And in a world where the rules keep shifting, self-definition becomes the only form of stability left. Because the modern man's greatest rebellion isn't walking away from women, it's walking away from confusion. Section 9. The psychological fallout. What this shift reveals about modern men. What we're witnessing isn't just a dating trend, it's a psychological transformation. The mass withdrawal of successful men from modern dating isn't about anger or defeat, it's a reaction to a deeper emotional dissonance. It's the symptom of men who've spent years giving more than they received, performing strength while suppressing exhaustion, seeking love while being told they were the problem for wanting clarity. The result? Emotional fatigue, a kind of quiet burnout that doesn't show up in public, but seeps into every private moment. These men aren't bitter, they're tired of games disguised as romance, tired of being measured against expectations they never agreed to, tired of being told they're emotionally unavailable when in reality, they've simply run out of safe spaces to be honest. This withdrawal isn't about rejecting connection, it's about self-preservation. For the first time in generations, men are learning that peace and purpose can exist without partnership. They're finding emotional fulfillment through growth, discipline, brotherhood, and creation, things that once came after love, but now exist instead of it. And yet beneath the calm of this newfound solitude lies something profound. Men are quietly redefining masculinity. The stoic silence of the past is evolving into mindful solitude. What once was seen as detachment is now self-mastery. These men aren't isolating, they're recalibrating. They're teaching themselves that validation doesn't have to come from being chosen, it can come from being complete. Still, this shift has consequences. Many of these men struggle with emotional numbness. They've built walls so strong that nothing gets through. Not pain, not love, not hope. And while those walls protect their peace, they can also imprison it. Because even sovereignty has a shadow, disconnection. So the next phase of this psychological evolution isn't about men choosing solitude, it's about learning balance. Learning how to keep the peace they've earned without losing the capacity for connection. Because the real goal was never isolation, it was integration. A life where love, when it comes, isn't a battlefield or a bargain, but a meeting of two people who no longer need to save or fix each other. They've already done that work alone. Conclusion. As we come to the end of this exploration, it becomes clear that this movement, this quiet exodus of successful men from modern dating, is not born from resentment, it's born from awakening. It's the realization that peace is priceless, and that not every connection deserves access to it. For generations, men were taught that fulfillment was found through partnership, that success meant finding someone to build a life with. And while love can still be one of life's greatest experiences, today's men are learning a new truth. You don't need a relationship to feel complete. You need alignment with your values, your purpose, and your self-respect. Walking away from dating isn't about rejection, it's about redefinition. It's a man saying, I no longer measure my worth by who chooses me, but by how I choose myself. It's about realizing that solitude can be sacred, that boundaries can be healing, and that peace can be more intoxicating than chaos disguised as love. But here's the deeper challenge. Once a man finds peace, he must learn to protect it without hardening it. Because peace, when guarded too tightly, can become isolation. The goal isn't to close off from the world, it's to open up selectively, intentionally, to those who truly understand the cost of your calm. So where does that leave us? It leaves us at a crossroads, not between love and loneliness, but between chaos and clarity, between old expectations and new awareness, between chasing approval and standing firmly in authenticity. If you're a man watching this, maybe you recognize yourself in these words. Maybe you felt the fatigue, the frustration, the quiet longing for something deeper, something real. If so, you're not broken, you're simply waking up. The path forward isn't about rejecting love, it's about reclaiming your power within it. Love freely, but wisely. Give deeply, but selectively. Never again confuse sacrifice with connection, or validation with value, because the man who learns to stand in solitude doesn't fear losing anyone, he fears losing himself. And when that kind of man finally chooses to love, his love will be the rarest kind, not born of need, but born of wholeness. If this message resonated with you, take a moment to reflect, share it, start a conversation, and if you're building your peace brick by brick, stay the course. Because the world doesn't need more men chasing love, it needs more men standing strong in their peace.